Well, all right, all right. It is Friday, February 28, and tonight is part two of Roger.
Shepherds in Crisis,
Shepherds
Part
in
2.
Crisis.
Shepherds
Part
in
two, part two.
Crisis.
You asked for it last week. It was all over the chat. You
Yes.
wanted to revisit Shepherds in Crisis Part Two, and so we're back again with that this evening. Shepherds in Crisis Part Number Two. We're excited to be here. Listen, Raj, if they missed last week, I've got somebody's mic is open. I need to fix that right quick because I'm hearing a lot of the
Yes.
feedback. Not sure. Let's do that. Okay, I think we've got that. All right. If
All
people
right.
missed last week, if any of our audience missed last week, Roger, real quick, what did they miss from last
My
Friday
Lord,
night?
we had a conversation
Hmm.
on this same topic, Shepherds in Crisis. Our two guests, Pastor Victor Bartley and Dr. Lola Johnston. Man, they shared from their heart. They shared their what they thought was going to happen, what actually happened, what can
Yeah.
happen, what should happen, what maybe happen. And man, they laid some bombs on us, and it was a great conversation on this topic of pastors burnout. Matter of fact, they shared some nuances that I never thought of. When I think about burnout, I'm thinking, well, I'm just tired. But they actually kind of developed a thinking or a construct in where I never thought that burnout would be caused by toxic workplaces.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and Raj, I think that was what was really intriguing about last week's conversation is that, we kind of framed the discussion about pastoral burnout, but the reality is that no matter where you are, what you do, you are prone or susceptible to burning out. And so we heard a lot of good things to help figure out how to recognize it, how to manage it, how to deal with it. And so again, if you missed last week, we've got the bad news is that you missed it. The good news is, Roger, what's the good news?
The good news is you can head over to the PRT.live, our website, and you will get every single minute of last week's presentation, and even all in the past of all of our shows. You can really get an opportunity to kind of get up to speed on what we have done over the past 10 seasons.
All right. Now we've got a dynamic show or conversation to have this evening, and we're excited to get into it. We don't want to keep you too long away from it, but we do want to recognize that this is February 28th. It is the last day of Black History Month.
Black History Month,
We have been
yes.
celebrating the diversity, the equity, and inclusion of Black History Month all month long. Um, and we are excited about that. I think, Raj, we would be remiss not to talk about real quick. Our country is going through a whole lot of interesting stuff right now, and no matter where you land on the political spectrum, I think that one of the things that we here at Pastors Roundtable would just want to encourage our audience to do. Is there's nothing that supplements or suffices for prayer. Um, and
Mm,
so we want to invite all of our PRT family just to keep our nation in prayer, keep our leaders in prayer. Um, and then I think the other thing that I think that we say is that it's not just about prayer, that there's something for you to do. It
right.
may be different from wherever you sit from your seat, but you figure out what to do in prayer. And so
That's
we
right.
just want to encourage you and let you know we know that there is this blackout thing that's happening today.
Matter,
For
matter
for
of fact, matter of fact, we need to share that was part of our decision. Should we do something tonight to cause dollars to be placed to be paid out? All these things are all part of the way we are being exploited in a
Yeah.
sense. based on what we're doing. So, but we thought that the conversation was important enough that we actually had to have this conversation tonight.
So, and we know that there were two of the platforms that we're streaming on were some of those that were being blacked out as far as Google and Meta. And so basically, if you're not watching this live tonight, if you're watching this later on the week, we're not mad at you. We appreciate you coming through anyhow, even on the replay. And we hope that tonight's conversation is a blessing to you. So we've already
Yes,
talked
yes.
about what's on the table. Shepherds in crisis, pastoral burnout. That's what's on the table. Raj, who's at the table tonight?
But before we bring who's at the table, we want to welcome those who are joining us. Please put in the
Yes.
chat where you're visited from, at us from. You're looking in the replay. Just put in the chat where you're looking at us. We'll go back through and we'll acknowledge. I want to acknowledge my mother who is on. She is in Trinidad
Mom.
right now, and she is actually dealing with bereavement.
No.
A good friend, her husband passed away, and so she is in the middle of walking through the valley of the shadow of death. And so, but we're so glad you're here, Mom. We know that you are a strong PRT person, and so we're glad you're here. We want to also acknowledge Rodney Smith, who is here with us. So we pray that tonight's conversation, those are the names we see, but tonight's conversation is going to be fruitful to not only those two who have signed in, but those who are listening. But at the table tonight, oh man, at the table tonight, as I shared, we talked about last week, the guests, one of the guests shared about a toxic work environment, which triggered our HR specialist,
Hmm.
who's part of our team. And sure enough, she responded. She was in the middle of the discussion, and I said, "Hey, we got to get her on." So tonight, we're just so glad to have one of our team members, Stephanie Scott, HR director for the South Central Conference, to be here with us. She's going to join in this conversation, and we have the esteemed director for ministries and for ministerial and evangelism for the Southern Union. So he is the ministerial director for the
What?
Southern Union, serves as the one who helps to minister to pastors in and so he's here with us. We'd speak none other than Pastor Roger Hernandez. Don't mix it up.
Oh.
Roger Wade, Roger Hernandez, the other Roger. We're
Hey,
just so
it's
glad to
Roger
have
and Roger. Look at there. Hey,
Roger.
all right. Lady and gentlemen, greetings. Oh,
Good evening.
Raj, we can't hear you, Roger. Oh, it says, there we go. Let's try now, Raj.
Yeah. Everything good?
Everything is good. All right.
All right.
We saw your mouth moving, Roger, but we couldn't hear you talking.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I was just saying where two or three Rogers are gathered, there is power.
Something.
Nice to be here. Nice to be here. I love it. I love it. We're gonna have a great conversation about a topic I'm very passionate about.
Looking forward
Excellent,
to it.
excellent.
Zora B, greetings from the state of Tennessee. She says, we're glad to have you with us tonight, Zora. Marie Washington is joining us from West Palm Beach, Florida. Good to have you with us, Marie. And she says she is watching on YouTube. All right, you guys, we are grateful to have both of you. Stephanie, good evening.
Hey.
Steph is a part of the PRT team. Both of our guests tonight are PRT alum. They have been with us before. For some reason, it seems that whenever Roger Hernandez is with us, we have some major technical issue or problem. We're going to see if we can get through this whole night without any of that. We already kind of started off with him being muted, but hopefully, Raj, that's all it is this
Yeah.
time. Yeah, hopefully
All
we'll be
right.
good all the way through tonight. We want to give you guys just a little chance to share with our audience just a little bit more about you and where you are and what you're doing, just to give a little scope of the roles that you're currently engaged in. Some of our audience is not necessarily as familiar with you as those of us here are. So we're going to start with Stephanie, then we're going to go over to Raj. Steph, just tell us very quickly. Um, what's going on with you, where you are, what you like about it, what you hate about it, who you, no, don't do any of that. But we're going to give you about 30 seconds and the time is yours, my friend.
So, good evening, everyone. It's good to be back on PRT on the front side, sometimes on the back side.
Yes.
I am actually still at South Central Conference. I am the Human Resources Director for South Central Conference. And I also work with the Office of Regional Conference Ministries as their HR consultant. And so I am pretty much engaged across, all 9 regional conferences, and of course, very deeply involved in South Central Conference. And just by way of background, I have been director in HR for about 27 years now. So I was working in Chicago as director of human resources for an organization in Chicago prior to transitioning into church work. So I will give Roger number one uh, the credit for me coming to work for the church. It was a cold February
Oh,
day
wow.
6 years ago. The high in Chicago was about 3 below 0, and he happened to call while I was on my way to do some work for the Chicago Cubs, and I was like, I can't do another winter, and so that's my story.
Wow. The things that come out
Chicago,
on PRT. I love
Amen.
it.
Amen.
All right.
The Chicago loss is South Central's gain. We have been blessed to have Stephanie with us.
Excellent, excellent. To my ministerial director and classmate and friend Roger Hernandez, talk to us, Doc. What's going on with you these days? Where are you? What are you doing?
Hi, I work at the Southern Union. I'm a ministerial and evangelism director. I'm married to Kathy, who works alongside with me as a evangelism coordinator, and we have 4 children. It's required in Hispanic families to have more than two. Um, and we have 5 grandkids, all of them girls.
Wow.
So
Wow.
if anybody can put in the chat, what would be a formula so we can get a boy,
Oh my.
please share it with us so we can share it with our children. Because the house, I love all those girls, I love them, but man, so many words. They call me Lito, which is abuelito, it's a diminutive in Spanish. So I'm enjoying my time as a empty nester with my wife. We love it. We don't have to hide food anymore. It's fantastic. It's amazing, and we're just excited to be here tonight.
Nice.
All right, all right. Sounds good. Sounds good. And by the way, we want to invite our audience tonight. If you've got questions for our guest about burnout or about some of the things that in the structure or just as the conversation flows, we want to invite you to throw your questions in the chat. We can't promise that we're going to be able to get to every single one of them, that we're going to do our best. We want to invite our guest as well, that if you see a question or comment come up in the chat that you want to pause wherever we are and to address that, we want you to feel free to do that as well. All right. Let's are we ready? We're ready to hop in?
Let's
Do it.
rock. Let's
Let's do
rock.
it.
All right, here we go. So, question number one. Um, and I guess this one is more directed. Well, I'm going to direct this to both of you. A lot of times we talk about it when we say in ministry, that's a phrase that we tend to reserve or direct at pastors. But Stephanie, we don't want to diminish the idea that what you do is ministry as well. And so we're going to be very inclusive in this question. How has burnout affected your ability to innovate and to adapt to changing ministry needs, particularly in light of recent global events like the pandemic, like other things that we see? Some people in local areas, like fires out in California, can be a burnout. Some people had election burnout back in November, or political stressors that are happening even right now. How have those things affected any sense of burnout or your ability to engage what you do? Let's start with Roger, and then we'll move to Steph.
I like to preface my comments with a couple of things that I just want to inform what we're doing tonight. Here's three things to remember. Number one, most 41% of people who burned out a month after coming back from vacation.
Wow.
Hmm.
Wow.
All right. So, which leads us to the second thing I want you to remember, and it's this. I love this quote by Kerry Newhoff. He says, "Time off is not going to fix your problem if the problem is what you spend time on."
Mm, good.
Right.
Good.
So every we think, well, if I just got away, I'll come back refreshed, and my burnout situation would be great. But 41% burn out a month after coming back from vacation, right? So this is a very real thing, and I think that you can be stressed or you can be creative, but it's hard to be both.
Hmm.
So one of the things that happens when you're stressed and you're burnout is that you can become cynical, and cynicism is the killer of creativity.
Wow.
And in order to be in ministry and effective, you have to have a creative spirit. But that's the first thing that goes. You don't want to dream new dreams. You don't want to think new things. You don't you don't want any other ideas. So I see when I'm walking down that path, this is what I do. This is how I recognize burnout in myself, right? Or symptoms of burnout and in others is when people give you $10,000 answers for $10 questions,
Hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
If you say, "Hey, can you bring me that pencil?" What do you think? What do you think? Do you think I have stuff to do? That I don't have time to bring you pens, and they give you a $10,000. That's a sign of burnout. So it affects your creativity. I think if we're going to be effective, that's the first thing that is going to go when you're in the burnout zone.
Okay. Steph, you have anything to add to that?
I would probably add, first of all, with burnout, that as we're looking from a conference standpoint in South Central Conference and certainly in the regional conferences, and I can't speak for the state conferences, but burnout for our ministers, our workforce, typically is compounded by other factors. For example, um, our workforce is burned out a lot because of the type of work they're doing. Um, a lot of our pastors are working in areas that are don't have a lot of resources, and so that impacts their ministries. Our schools in the non-regional conferences are often not as well supported, and that's not every school, but and that's probably schools across the country. To be very honest, like there are lack of resources, and so trying to do your job is difficult. With the other thing that I'll add is, and I'm gonna throw it out here now, and then we'll probably coming back around to it, is to Pastor Hernandez's point, the vacation piece of trying to become refreshed is like putting salt in the ocean.
Uh huh.
It
Uh-huh.
doesn't
Yeah.
do as much as you would want it to do if the environment that you're working in
Hmm.
isn't one that you feel like you can thrive in and grow in. So part of what um, sort of um, sort of makes burnout happen is in fact the actual work environment that people are working in. So that could include the physical workspace, that could include the leadership, that can include co-workers. For pastors, that might include congregants. So there, for teachers, that might be students. So there are a lot of factors that play into burnout, And those things are compounded in a work concept by external things. So, we don't live our lives really in silos, though we try to do that in some ways. So that's one of the things I think that needs to be considered. Like, it's not just
Yeah.
an issue with a pastor being burned out because he's preached his best sermon. He also has to deal with the pressures um, of being an African American, maybe in the South or what have you. So there's external factors that add into that.
Mhm, mhm.
I'm curious.
I can I throw one last thing in there, and it's this. Look it up on Google, and not that the internet is always reliable, but there have been several studies that
Yes.
have compared the PTSD brain of an Iraq veteran and a
Yes.
pastor, and the pastor's brain is the worst shape.
Mhm.
Mm.
Mercy.
So
Wow.
that's the level, because as a pastor, I remember I preached a Sabbath morning a sermon that I felt very good about. In fact, I am right now in that church that I used to pastor 20 years ago. Preach a sermon. I remember it was in Seven Churches of Revelation. Felt very good about. At the As I was done with the sermon, a policeman came and said, "You need to come with us." And they took me to a member's house whose husband had committed suicide. So before she could get there, I was cleaning the brain matter from the bathroom floor because I didn't want her to see it. So I was on my knees. So half an hour ago, I'm preaching a sermon,
Yeah.
and now I'm cleaning brain matter from the floor. And
Mercy.
in the afternoon, we had a Bible study with youth. And at night, some of the youth got together for a party, and I had to take a couple of them home that were drunk. So that's one day, right? The heights
Right.
and the
Lows.
lows.
Yeah.
So that brain chemistry in our line of work, if you're not intentional about making sure that there are pauses. When I first started, they told me, my first senior pastor said, "You cannot take days off because the devil doesn't take days off." But the
Mm.
devil is not my role model, and I don't wake up every day trying to be like the devil. I want to be able to rest like Jesus. So those are some things that's the reality of the profession, right?
Yeah.
And you have to go at it understanding that those things impact your life in real ways.
Wow.
So
Wow.
so so
That's huge to take into consideration. I want to just kind of the question was framed in the context of innovation. Like how does burnout impact innovation? Can I go just flip that just a little bit and say, is there a role that innovation plays in helping to avert or address burnout? Like somebody who's creative and innovative, and if they have those ideas and those that kind of innovative juices flowing, is there any play or thing in that kind of helps a pastor keep going?
So so let me take a quick stab at this from an administrative perspective. I think that creativity is stifled when the environment that a person is working in is suffocating. And so I know we're putting it under the guise of stress, and I do think stress has something to do with it. But I would probably argue for those individuals who work at South Central Conference, one of the things when do our workers meeting, one of the things that I say at every single meeting, and I think Roger Wade can attest to this, is I want our employees to be happy at work. I want them to be happy at
Mhm.
work. And so anything that I can do to make sure that, because work is just one portion of somebody's life. But we spend a lot of our time, and pastors in particular spend a lot of time in their work environment. And by environment, I don't mean necessarily the church, but in their role as pastors. And so I think part of the responsibility is on the administration to recognize that having a good work environment for our workforce is important. And then it connects and helps our people to be creative and innovative. And when a person feels safe at work, when they feel comfortable at work, then that opens up the door for them to be creative. When their ideas are received, so yeah, when their ideas are received, then they feel valid, they feel validated, and that helps to create, like, it's cyclical, it all works together, so it's not really a silo kind of thing, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right, Raj, you want to take a step of that?
Yeah, I think that there is a lot of uh, power and benefit just in the fact that you know that your administration got your back.
Mm.
I remember being a pastor of a church, and I prefer a more contemporary worship style. So we started using instruments. So some people from the church did not like it. So what do? They never talk to you. They go to the conference. And the conference comes and the representative, and they're like, I heard that, people are upset, and, you should make sure that you don't upset people. And then, so my creativity was stifled. Compare that to another congregation in a different conference where, once again, we started to do some innovative things in the worship space, and the director for the department from the conference came and preached and said, "Man, there's a freshness about this. This is amazing." Just the fact that people heard somebody else saying, "We like this,"
Mm.
I felt I didn't lose sleep, because now you're thinking about, how am I going to deal with the naysayers in the church? But I don't have to worry about my conference, because my conference got me.
Yeah.
I remember when I was in the conference, a pastor that had issues with a church, and there was a group in the church that said, "We want to go talk to the president." And the president said something amazing. He said, "I don't receive delegations. If you guys want to talk to me, you come talk to me one by one." Because what happens is, there's two or three people that don't like stuff, and they surround themselves with other people. Like, yeah, a lot of people say, a lot of people are you. You're a lot of people. A lot of people don't like it. A lot of people are saying. So when he did that, he destabilized the antagonist and diffused the situation. So I think the environment that we are working in, there are days that are high, there are days that are difficult. But if we know that our conference officials have
Mhm.
our back, right? Like, if we make a mistake, they'll call us out in private, not
Yeah.
just in front of the congregation, right? So that has a lot to do with, I can be most creative when I am secure in the
Mm.
relationship that I have with the people who employ me.
And it
Gotcha,
sounds like
gotcha.
that helps kind of stave off some burnout. It's like, yeah, it's going to be easier to maintain your focus and not get, I hate this thing, I got to get out of here type of a mindset when you have that kind of a support. Good.
When you
So
second
listen,
guess every when you second guess every decision, you're not creative,
mm,
right? When you're given permission to fail, when you're given permission to try, it just creates a different environment. But if you have to second guess everything, we're like, what's going to happen if I do this? Then it just kills your creativity. You just maintain the status quo and hope to get transferred to a better location. And meanwhile, I it's hard you know if you're a leader, you don't mind people telling you what to do. You mind them telling you how to do it.
Mm.
Like, this is
mm,
your assignment. This is your assignment, right? But there's nothing more that destabilizes a leader than giving them responsibility with no authority.
mm.
Wow.
Mhm.
So this is what you want to do, but you have to come through me. And there are sometimes, not in the Southern Union because we have perfect administrations in our union, But in other places where everything has to be run through the president, everything has to be run through administration, and that's really for leaders. They'll find a place where that doesn't happen.
Mm, mm. So listen, as you were unpacking that concept about the pastoral burnout, is busyness a sign of burnout? Is it if we are busy? Because I know going into the pandemic we were busy. Coming out of the pandemic we were even more busy. Is busyness a sign towards yeah I'm working towards a burnout, or is it how you manage that busyness? Anyone?
You want to go, Stephanie? You want me to take
Yeah,
that?
I'll say busyness without results may be a sign of burnout. I think that you're
Mm.
the because we are busy. Everybody has things that they need to do. The I think one of the factors that you want to consider is, are you actually accomplishing something? And so, as an HR director, for example, I deal with a lot of documentation, and there are days when I am feeling. I've learned how to sort of navigate my emotions, and there are days when I just cannot look at another piece of paper. And so there are days
Yeah.
when that's just not what I'm going to do. And so to sit and act like I'm being busy for the sake of being busy is not actually producing what needs to happen with those
Yeah.
documents. So I think
Yeah.
the idea that you want to get to a place where um, you actually have results of your actions is kind of a factor that you're looking at. So if you don't have any results, then yeah, that may be a sign that burnout is there.
Mhm.
Mm,
Um,
okay.
a game changer for me was after reading a book called At Your Best, right? So that's from a pastor who suffered burnout. Great book. The writer makes the case that you should not manage your calendar as much as you manage your energy,
Hmm.
Mhm.
right? So instead of looking at your calendar as like, these are the tasks that I need to do, you separate your days into red, yellow, and green lights. And you ask yourself, what time of the day am I at my most effective? My green zone is in the morning. There are some
Mm,
people who are night people, and their green zone is 7 to 11 p.m., right? So my green zone is in the morning. After 7, I'm going downhill. My So in the
mm,
green zone, you do the most important things. You don't answer. Um, I'm gonna say it in a very positive way. You don't answer stupid emails. You don't do minutia. You do big ticket items, stuff that require a lot of energy. So you're managing not the calendar, but you're managing your energy. And then during yellow, these are things that you just gotta get done. And then you understand that red means you're not going to be very effective. It's better not to have a conversation with that first elder in the red zone that you're having issues with. It's better to just, in the red zone, rest, go for a walk, do something that you like every day. I divide my day into three. Two of them are for work, and one of them is for me.
mm.
So I'm taking a vacation every day. So I manage my day based on my energy
Mhm.
and not on like, well, this is all that, because here's the issue with ministry. And Stephanie, even though she works in an office, there's stuff that she's thinking about after she leaves the office, because the work
Hmm.
goes with you, right?
Oh
With
yeah. Yes.
pastors don't have a finish line.
Right.
It's just like parenting, right? Parenting doesn't have a finish line. You're not ever not a parent. A pastor goes out in shorts to Walmart. There's bound. I mean, you can't never smoke a cigarette as an Adventist, because you'll find another Adventist somewhere, wherever it is. You have to you have to understand. You have to understand. It's like I'm a pastor all the time. There's no finish line. So I have to put the finish lines, because if I don't, I will always work, and I'll work through the red zones. And that's where burnout comes in.
And
Mm.
I would like to add to that point, that is, I think that is mostly effective when you have an administration that supports that type of self-governance. Um, so, but I think you also have to determine where you work best. Roger Wade raised his hand because Roger Wade and I both know that Roger Wade is the night owl of night owls. Roger Wade gets into his groove at 11 o'clock at night. And so, one of the things though that has to happen is, from an HR standpoint, from an administration standpoint, is to have those transparent conversations. I will throw this out here right now because I think, again, that is a part of what creates burnout for pastors specifically, and that is that there's some type of power dynamic or some level of distrust that happens in the church. Now, I'm being real, kind of like Pastor Lola Moore Johnson last week. Like, there's some things that you just have to put out there. There's a power and control dynamic that happens in most conferences, so that people don't, the workforce doesn't feel empowered to say, "Hey, I'm going to work, from home, or I'm going to work these hours." It's almost like they have to prove themselves worthy to the administration. And this is not to any particular administration, but I do see that dynamic in our denomination. And as an HR person, I'm always sort of, well, I most of my work was not in denominational work, so some of the practices that happen in church work are different to me, and so some of them I'm learning, some of them I'm hoping that I never learn, in order to be able to support our pastors and their ability to self-regulate and help themselves to create boundaries so that they aren't burning out.
Good stuff.
Awesome,
Good
awesome.
stuff.
So let's look at this. I know we're talking from a pastoral perspective, but we can actually look at this from any kind of organization. We have folks who are listening, and they, from last week, they did take some of the key things and transposed it into their situation. But in your experience, how does pastoral burnout impact the overall health and growth of a congregation? Or the group that this person or the leader is in. But we're looking at the pastoral. How has that impacted the overall health and growth of the congregation? Uh, Roger, can you help us with that?
Yeah, I mean, healthy leaders um, impact healthy organizations. Leadership is the lid, right? So if you are operating in a space where you are burnout, you will tend to be more short with people.
Hmm.
That's going to create some relational dynamics. You're going to just go with the status quo. So egos won't be attracted to that type of leadership. So you just do the minimum possible so you don't get fired. It affects, it's hard to describe it, but you know when it's there. I don't know if you've
Hmm.
ever been in a situation that the moment you arrive, you see there's stuff happening. You can't tell yet what it is, but you know there's something off. Did that ever happen to you, that you show up to a church and you're just like, I don't know what's going on here, but this is off. I remember showing up to a
Mm,
church where two deacons were arguing in the door about who, and I'm like, the moment that I arrived, I already knew there's some issues there. And the pastor was very hands off because he was going through some issues of his own. And it's like, I just give up. So it affects directly the health of your organization when you as a leader are going through the burnout. That's why it's important so you to recognize the signs and understand that there's difference between being tired and being burnout. So I'm a stickler for definitions and words. When somebody says, "Man, I'm just burnt out," are you burnt out or are you just tired?
Mm,
Right? When it's just like when somebody says, "Well, man, today I feel depressed." That's not what depression is. That's not something that you
mm,
feel one day and then the next day you're fine. You just had a sad day. You had a bad day, right? So giving us the opportunity of recognizing what it does to you and what impact it creates in the people who are following you, um, because this shortness and this sparks that fly, um, people don't want to work for that, for a leader that's like that, and it's going to affect the overall health of the church. People are going to leave, leaders are going to step down, um, and sometimes it's the haters, but sometimes it's you.
mm. Okay.
I would add also that the example that it sets, and I think part of that tone is that you start to create an example for members in your church that think that it's okay to respond in a negative way or to be burned out, and so it doesn't set a good example, um, and so your members tend to follow the leadership. So I would add that.
Okay. Okay.
Good, good, good. Listen, I want to kind of shift gears a little bit, and I want to frame this question in a little piece of a story. Last year, end of last year, I started something at my church that I called Simple Sabbath. The idea was is that oftentimes for church leaders and for members, Sabbath can just be a whole lot of work. It's busy work. Praise teams are coming in rehearsing on Friday nights. The hospitality team is cooking during the week. They're setting up the room on Friday. They're serving. There's a whole lot of stuff. First time we did this, we took folk out of the building, went out to a nature reserve, a park, and it was just it was nice. It was relaxing. It was kind of chill. I noticed though that as nice as it was for everybody else that was there, as the pastor, I felt like I was still on. Um,
Mm,
and I was, trying to make sure that everything, went well, and I was available for everybody that had any questions and all of that stuff. The second month that we tried it, um, the first week we had about 35, 40 folks show up. The second time we did it, my wife was there, I was there, and that was it. Nobody else showed up. We're out at a little park on the beach. There were some folk who showed up later in the day, but this one was the best one for me. I'm sitting there out in the park with me and my wife, bound by the beach, the seashore, and we're doing the Sabbath school lesson. We're doing all that kind of stuff, and I'm not on. I'm like I'm not. That's all of that stuff, and it was and I said, everybody's got to feel that. When as a pastor, Roger, or as an administrative guy who counsels pastors, Stephanie, in your role as you deal with pastors, how do you help pastors manage the boundaries of always being available or always feeling like that you have to be on? How do you cope with that? How do you deal with that? How do you counsel that to pastors and church leaders that may feel that pressure?
Yeah, a phrase that I like to use, especially with chronic uh, people who want to drain you, right? I call them positivity vampires. Your emergency does not necessarily constitute my urgency. I went to Cuba for a week, no cell phone use. When I came back, there was like 19 messages from this person. Everybody knows this person. They write to you in all caps. Their text messages. There's always an emergency. I call them trauma hoppers because they don't want to be fixed. They just want to tell you other issues. You think you can help them, and you try to act like their savior, but you play Messiah, you end up being crucified. And
Mm,
the boundaries are, I want to be clear and available, and I want to communicate when I am available, right? Because if you never say when you're available, they'll assume you're available all the time. But you
mhm,
say these are, unless this is an emergency, here are the times that you can reach me, right? So there's there's the boundaries. I want to be a father to my kids. I want to be a husband to my wife. I like to run and exercise. I have interests. I like to write. I love to do different things. So the only people who don't respect boundaries are people who don't respect boundaries. So we're always concerned about making people upset. That's why it is important. And if we have administrators listening, one of the issues with pastors is that there are no clear expectations. So how do I know if I'm doing a good job? If my church is growing, well, there's Christian nationalists who are growing their churches. Are they doing a good job? Right. So if I'm measured by budgets, butts in the seats, and baptisms, that's my only measure, then I can be leading a church and I be doing in the worst way. So what are the expectations? How do I know if I'm doing a good job? Who
Yeah.
is pastoring me? How do I know that these boundaries that I have are the correct ones? And how do I communicate that to my church? So I think that's where it starts. It starts by me saying, I'm going to be available. I have an issue with pastors who never get back to you. Like, dude, you pastor a church of 50 people. You can't get back to me? Dude, come on. I mean, come on. Like, never respond to emails. So it's one thing for you to have your boundaries, another thing never to
That's good.
communicate. You never respond to texts, you never respond to calls. So I tell people, listen, I'm going to get back to you in 24 hours.
Mhm.
I have These are the times that you can reach me. So if I don't get back to you, it's because you try to reach me at a time that I was unable to get back to you. But I'm going to get back to you. So it works both ways. I want to have clear boundaries. I want to communicate that to the people, and I'm going to ask them to respect that. But I'm also going to respect them. So when they communicate, I've sent emails to pastors, and the pastors are like, "Well, I never saw it, but I have a read thing in my email that I know you saw it because you
Receipt.
opened it."
I got.
So, so don't try to play the player. Come on. I mean, you like see. It works both ways.
Yeah.
I want to be clear in my communication, and I also want to make sure that when they need something from me, they know how to get me and how to find me and when I'm going to respond.
Roger,
I,
you
I,
you mentioned.
can I add something before you go through that?
Sure, go ahead.
The, the other thing I do want to mention, though, to your story, Pastor, is that as individually, I think each person, each pastor needs to sort of remember why they're doing what they're doing. Going back to their first love, going back to the call that they felt in ministry. We just had a workers meeting and had a wonderful presentation. So I'm going to drop his name in the chat. Nathaniel Drew did an excellent presentation. But one of the things that I think is really critical is, or for pastors, and I'm a pastor's kid, but one of the things that I think is that there is some self expectations that, like, you all put on yourselves expectations that nobody placed on you to begin with. And so there you
Mm,
have you had a good time at the beach because you did not have to quote unquote perform or respond to other people. And so, in a lot of ways, I think ministry has shifted where congregations are so reliant on pastors. They are no longer self sufficient. And I think that pastors also have, in certain ways, and I'm not a pastor, but I'm gonna use this term real loosely, but I think in a lot of ways, pastors have sort of a God complex. Pastors are not called to save people, but we use that term a lot. Well, we're here out here to save souls, but that's not the job. That isn't what the
Hmm.
expectation is. There's nothing in the job description like that. A pastor's job is to sow seeds. That's it. That's it. Um, our construct, the construct of the church, generally speaking, has been that there are these measures of success. But I would argue that those are are fake measures. I don't. That's not really the word I want. If you baptize, so I'll use this very quickly, and then I'll let you move on. When if you have an evangelistic meeting and you baptize 100 people, if you might get kudos because you baptized those 100 people, but those people now disciples of Christ? And I'm not saying members of our church. I'm saying,
Hmm.
are they solidly disciples
Yeah.
of Christ? And so if our mindset shifts, then as pastors, as ministers, everybody who claims the name of Christ should be pastoring in our various capacities every day, all day, but not toward necessarily the goal of numbers or money, but because we're helping people develop a relationship with Christ. So it becomes more relational. The reason I would argue that you had a good day that day with your wife, Pastor, is because you were in relationship with your wife. And so you
Yeah.
knew, you already were accepted. You didn't have to perform, you didn't have to work as hard, versus working with a group of people that I think oftentimes pastors feel like they have to sort of perform for in order to be accepted by.
Good. Good.
Mm.
Good. Um, I
Mm.
want to dig in
I like Rodney there for a minute.
with dig in, Roger, just a little bit. And this may be a little off the topic a bit, but you mentioned the idea, and Stephanie, you mentioned it as well, about this job description or the measure, what measures success for a pastor. Um, Stephanie, you said it is just to sow the seeds. But then, Roger, you kind of brought up the idea that if it's not baptisms, if it's not attendance, if it's not like tithe money, there's no other thing to guide a pastor to know whether or not they are doing what is expected of them. Is it just to be able to sow seeds? Um, are there other metrics, or Roger, as you have moved between conferences and even unions and places around the world where you've seen, have you seen conferences or administrators that are giving pastors more detail as to what their job entails or what is expected of them, and what does that look like, if you have seen it?
Yeah, I have seen it, and it varies by conference and it varies by administration, even in some conferences. I think power and control is the leadership of yesteryear. It still exists, but I have seen conferences where in their workers' meeting and the communication with pastors, they are clear about expectations and they're clear about support. I've seen them call pastors and make sure, hey, are you taking your day off? Are you taking your vacation? Here are the, you can take one every 3 months. We have a month that has 5 Sabbaths. That Sabbath you can go and visit another church, and they're clear about communicating the time that you have off. So I have seen it, and it starts at the presidential office. That's where everything flows. We are a presidential, like it or not, we're a presidential denomination. So I don't think we shouldn't measure baptisms and giving and attendance. But I think it's not the only metric. And I also think that, if you see in the New Testament, sometimes there's a dip between there's an explosion. I like to look at it as my good friend Jose Cortez. You guys know him, right? Jose Cortez, he works at the NAD. He introduced me to my wife, right? And on most days, I'm thankful to him. And
Where's your horn,
that's
Roger?
I hope this is the
Wait.
day.
Come on.
that's all.
And
That's
and
all.
where's your
That's all he
filter,
did.
Roger?
That's all. That's all he did. He introduced us. He could not make Kathy fall in love with me or me fall in love with her. He introduced us. So I see myself as a matchmaker. I just introduce people to Jesus, and God is going to take that where it goes, right? I'm just
Mm.
constantly introducing people to Jesus through everything that I do. So that would be the answer to the question.
All right.
So you bring up a point now. I think in the next question we did talk a little bit about preparation, because I have to be honest with you. What you just shared is one of the things we are not necessarily prepared for when we go through school, when we go to seminary,
Mm-hmm.
or even taking religion classes or preparation classes for pastoring. When you're coming through the training that you're getting, you're not really you're trained on how to parse a text. This is how I like to put it. I could take
Mm-hmm.
a text, I could explain a text, I could talk about where the text is coming from. I could do the context of it, but in essence, my role as pastoring in terms of relationships is not taught at the seminary. What are some of the things we can do, or what are some of the things you can suggest in two ways? If we were talking to leadership, and if we were talking to the pastor, what are some of the things we can do to suggest how you can learn to be better prepared to avoid burnout or to manage it? Let's put it that way, to manage it.
Yeah. Um. First of all, I think seminary prepared me to lead in a world that no longer exists.
Mm,
Uh, so what I got there is a good theological training, but I almost burned myself out because there was no teaching on any of the other stuff that you just mentioned. So I think it's not just in the seminary in its undergrad, but it's also in pastors' meetings. It is
mm,
also the interns. I see some conferences that have such an intentional process with those 6 years that are formative. That is, they're put with a mentor. They're not sent to two little churches in the middle of nowhere and let's see, just jump in the water, see if you can swim. They're put with a mentor and they have regular meetings. I know this because my daughter is a pastor, and there's a coach. She has a coach. There's regular meetings. There's regular pastors meeting, and it's communicated. This is the path. This is how you do it. There's somebody that you can reach out to, not just a ministerial director. There's somebody else that's hired specifically for that. But if I'm talking to administrators, I'm like, what? So what's the process, right? What's the process? It just doesn't happen by happenstance. And if I'm talking to pastors, um, how do you know? Like, if your conference is not doing this, like, what mentors do you have? Who is mentoring you? What books? I realized early on that most of the issues that I would have in the church are leadership related. They're not theology related. Even the
Yeah.
theology
mm,
related stuff is like leadership stuff.
Yeah.
It's like who gets to say what goes on here, and you wrap that up in a theological bow. But it's all about power and control, right?
Hmm.
That's most of the issue.
Hmm.
So I said to myself, seminary has not prepared me for this. How many? We took one class, Anselm. You and I
Mm-hmm.
went together to seminary with Dr. Jones
Mm-hmm.
on leadership.
Yep.
That's it. That's it. And I'm thrown to the wolves, and I'm like, what is going on? My first elder called me little boy on the first board meeting. Like, I wanted to reach out across, and I reach out and touch him. And I'm like, what is this? So I said, I need to educate myself. So I started reading. Leaders are readers. I started reading. I used to go John Maxwell events. I started investing in myself. Well, I am responsible for my development. If
Mm,
development is not provided, this stuff is like, well, nobody told me. Like I need to be all in about me, even if other people are not. And when that
Right.
happens, I
Good.
think that's the best case scenario. If we have conferences that do it, amen. But if we have conferences that don't do it, you do it for you.
mm,
I
Yeah.
I would add, if I were speaking to, and I have spoken to pastors, one of the things that I try to be, I think is important both to the pastors, but also to administration. So I happen to have the privilege, I think I'm the only one that I have heard of. I'm the only HR director that sits on AdCom, on conferences, administrative committees. And so I'm very, there's a couple things that I said to our administration, and they laugh at it, and we giggle about it, but I'm very serious about it. And that's that my job as HR director is to protect our organization and to protect our employees. And I think anybody, wherever you work, whether it's for the church, whether it's for any place else, your HR director should be an advocate for the employees, and they should be an advocate for the organization to protect the organization. And so we kind of sit on the fence. And so I've laughed and I said, I'm not going to go to jail for anybody, but I'm going to be very transparent with people. And I think that from an administrative point of view, we have to start to be transparent, open with our workforce. I don't believe in cloak and dagger ministry and all of those kinds of things. And so I think that um, yeah, having that conversation to our administration to say, hey, what is the administration doing for our workers? I look at, for the Adventist church, most of our conferences have Adventist risk management for health insurance. So most of us, I think, on the call, and some people who may be watching, are familiar with Adventist risk. They know that they have health insurance, but most of our employees have not literally gone through all of the documents and read through, so they don't necessarily always know what their benefits are. My job as HR is to tell all of the pastors, you have unlimited counseling sessions that are covered under the Adventist risk plan. You
Yep.
can go
Mm-hmm.
and get counseling. You do have to, it does need to be a network. I also share with them, if you're in some small town that doesn't have counseling services that are covered necessarily under our network, you can appeal to your HR director, who will appeal to Adventist Risk to put that person in network so that it's covered. Um, it's going above and beyond to make sure our workforce is healthy. It's having the sabbaticals. South Central Conference has a sabbatical program. We want our pastors to take off. We want our pastors to take, every year, the pastors get time off to plan for the next year. It's not vacation time. It's just time away so that they can sort of organize and get themselves together. And then I'm one who, when I I'm one who wants to keep communication lines open. And so if our pastors need to get away for a day or two, give me a call. Let's talk about it. We work it out. And I'm not going to count that as your vacation time, because there's mental health,
Mhm.
mental wellness is a thing. And so I think that that's important. But that conversation needs to be, I think, not just coming from the pastors, but it needs to come from an HR department or from the ministerial department to advocate on behalf of having a physically well, emotionally well, spiritually well, financially well workforce. That's what keeps your folks in the game. We've had so many conversations about pastors leaving ministry. We know that there's been a significant drop in folks entering ministry to begin with. So for the people that we have, we need to take care of them and make sure that they can stay the course. And I think that that's the role of our organization, to make sure that we it's a bottom up sort of diet paradigm, where the administration is supporting the workforce versus the workforce propping up the administration.
So what would you what someone shared earlier, how can a congregation help a pastor who may be suffering from burnout? The question, first of all, is that we have to identify there is burnout. But what can congregations do? What would some of the things you would recommend for someone who is listening, who sits in the pew, that possibly tomorrow can begin the process of supporting their pastor to either manage or prevent burnout?
Yeah. A couple things I think about. Number one is eat before you go to church. That I'm not talking about food, but when they invite me to go eat somewhere and I don't know what kind of food they're gonna serve, I eat at home first. So when I get to the place, I'm not starving and I'm not hungry, and I'm there just to help other people get their food. So if you go from the expectation of like I'm here so I can get a blessing, I'm here so they can talk to my needs and bless me and help me. So I'm supposed to be eating on my own. I'm supposed to read the word on my own. I'm supposed to pray on my own, and I go to church not to be served, but to serve. So if you would do that for your pastor, and say, hey, how can I how can I be of service? Number one. Number two, not only email, text, and call when you have issues. Make it a point to encourage the person, him or her, and say, hey, thank you for the message. Be specific. This is what I appreciate about you. These are the things that I found helpful, right? In a because sometimes, like, I don't think there's a pastor there that gets good emails on Mondays. Most emails on Mondays are about the bad job you did on Sabbath.
Mm,
So what if you just email the person on Monday and say, hey, and number three is ask, how we doing, right? Is there anything that's troubling you, or anything that's stressing you out? Um, and a lot of times pastors won't volunteer that information, but if you ask, they'll at least give you a glimpse of what's happening in their world. So those are three practical things that you can do as a congregant to bless the pastor. It's the ministry of all believers. We're not Catholics. We don't
mm.
think there's a special impartation in the minister. It's like nobody came to visit me. Yeah, but elder went to visit you. I know, but the pastor didn't. Well, I mean, I don't know that there's a special impartation on the pastor. If somebody visited you, that's all that matters, right? So those are three practical things.
Stephanie?
I think that the conversation, there's a lot of things that are going through my mind, but one of the things I think that could happen that would help congregants support their pastors is for administration to regularly have conversations with the congregants. And by that, I don't mean coming when something is wrong, but coming to hear, to touch, to fellowship with the congregation. I think that goes a long way. And then referring back to Pastor Drew's presentation, one of the things that stood out to me that I thought was such an excellent um, suggestion, and I'm already behind the scenes pushing for it, is having mental health professionals, counseling professionals come to the church to meet with the church members before pastors are assigned to the church, because congregants go through trauma as well in their own personal lives, and then it may feel traumatic to have pastors come in, they get close, they get pulled out, and that whole cycle. But have them come in before a pastor comes, and then also after a pastor leaves, just so that um, the members have a place to sort of park some of their concerns, their issues, their frustrations. They can get professional support and recommendations. And then when a new pastor comes in, I think it would sort of smooth some of the territory in terms of setting, new boundaries and expectations that they may have for themselves and for the church. But I think that the idea that we would have a professional counselor or professional therapist on staff is something that I think administration needs to be thinking about. I appreciated Pastor Hernandez's statement when he said he was prepared for a church that doesn't exist anymore. I think that's how you phrase. I'm paraphrasing. When you're in the seminary, we are shifting. We are in a completely different environment now that I think we we saw the beginnings of when we had COVID. We had to shift a lot, and it was interesting to me when we were in COVID, everybody was very thrilled and happy, and well, not thrilled and happy, that may not be the right word, but people were excited that there was some new energy. This particular program, the Pastors Roundtable, came as a direct result of COVID. So people were being more creative and were able to have different platforms. And yet, when we came out of COVID, our natural instinct, it seemed to be to fight to go back to where we were.
Mm.
And there's, I think, a certain level of comfort that people have in the familiar, and but the familiar keeps you stuck at that place, and it does not allow for growth and development. So
I was sitting in a workers' meeting and we had a guest presenter come in. And I remember him saying something to us as pastors that really resonated with me. And he said, and he was an old, he was a more experienced pastor, had been a conference president, et cetera, et cetera. And he said to us, he said, every Monday, there's about 2 minutes where he wants to quit. Like every Monday morning, there's this little window, and I had already told folk that like almost every week there's this little spot where you just want to quit because of all of the issues that are now. For me, I'm one of those guys who pastored, or one of those pastors who pastored for years and years and years. I think I counted 16 years without ever taking a single vacation. Just didn't do it. Um, and I felt like I was having a blast. I never felt during that time like I needed to have one. It wasn't until I married late, but it wasn't until I got married and I was dating my wife that she kind of forced vacations on me. I never felt like I missed it. I never felt like I was overstressed or overburdened, except for that little window of time on those Monday mornings where it's like I'm done, I'm out. But there are other times where I felt like, man, I'm getting paid for this. This is awesome. I love these people. I love this work. I love what I'm doing. This is just such a blessing to be called to this thing. Um, for that little window, um, is there a spiritual resource for pastors who wrestle with that, or even if it's not the window, maybe their window is a week or a month, or sometimes the pastors go through seasons where they are depressed and where they are burnt out. We've talked about some pragmatic resources. What might be some spiritual resources that might be helpful to pastors facing burnout, or ministry leaders who we work with who are feeling that burnout? Is it all practical? Is there something spiritual? Sometimes we play those things off of the other as if one is good and one is bad. But are there some spiritual resources that you guys could recommend, or strategies even?
Yeah, I think for myself, when I feel most not just tired, but lack of creativity, lack of energy, it always comes back to four things. Uh, I'm not praying as I should.
Hmm.
I am not having balance in my life as I should. I'm not reading, and I'm not exercising and eating right. When I adjust those things, like this year, I'm doing something for the first time in my life, and I made fun. Have you ever made fun of something and then you do it, and then you're like, oh, I get it now. and then but you can't go back and fix everything. I used to make fun of people who journal. I'm like, that's dumb. Like, who writes stuff down? Like, I have ADD. I can't. But this year I started like 1 hour with God, and I'm journaling every day, and I found incredible insight in just spending that first time, the first part of the morning with God. There was a guy who loved chocolate, and he was working and got a job at a chocolate factory. And when the first day, when he first started, they said, "You can eat all the chocolate you want." And the first day, he said, "Really, for free?" "Yeah, you can eat all the chocolate you want." And the first day, man, he just pigged out on chocolate. Second day, third day, a weekend, he wanted to get as far away from chocolate as possible. We work in a chocolate factory, and it's amazing on, until it
Wow.
isn't, right? And so when we're connected to God, not because I'm preparing a sermon, but I'm journaling for me.
Yeah.
I'm not jotting down sermon ideas. I'm just talking about God about my kid and my like the word of the year for me this year is generous. I want to ask myself, what would a generous person do? And then just processing. So how was my generosity today? How did you tip? How did you treat people? How did you smile at people? I
Mhm.
think the average pastor prays for 10 minutes. So it's not that one is causation, but it's at least correlation. Like when
Mhm.
I get to spend time with God, not to do stuff for God, but just to spend time with God, it affects the rest of the stuff that I do.
Yeah,
Stuff. So,
I would agree with that. I would add that I think that it's for me it's important. I recently, I won't say maybe the last year or so, I've tried to be intentional in not just spending time with God, but being intentional in the specific time of day that I spend with God. And I found really honestly that when I take time before I pick up my phone to Google, before I look to see what's happening on social media, that I have that special time with God. It tends to help with the burnout. One of the reasons I came to the conference, believe it or not, was because I was literally burned out. I was in Chicago. I mentioned it at the beginning. It was cold, so I was tired of that. But I also was burned out at my job, and I remember very clearly many days driving to work, sitting in the parking lot, crying, getting myself together, and then going into the job. And I did not realize how burned out I was because I thought I really loved the job. I love the mission of our company. I love doing HR. I love people. I couldn't figure out why I did not like the job, but I couldn't figure out why I was so sad about it. When I went back, when I left there, I left and started South Central on a Wednesday. I left my job on a Sunday, but I didn't finish everything. I didn't finish everything. And so I had to go back up to the Chicago area. So I told my then boss at the time, I'm going to come and do the work that I did not finish. I'm going to come back and I'll complete it. And so I kept to my word. I went back to the building. I literally walked in the building and had a migraine. I literally was sick. Before leaving, I'm the HR director. I was on the rampage. I was snapping at people. I was going off on people. And I literally, when I came back, removing myself from the situation, I realized how burned out I was. I had to go back and apologize while I was there. And I couldn't actually even finish the work because I was so physically sick being in the building because of the response level. And so being aware of your body responses to stress, I think is important. But if you're taking care of yourself first, your spiritual health, that's, I think, important because Christ gives us the strength to do everything. So taking care of your spiritual strength first, and then recognizing your physical limitations, I think is important. And then I think everything else kind of can fall into place.
yeah. One more question, and well, because our time is just getting away from us. Is burnout a clinical term, or is burnout the same thing as depression? Wow, we said that burnout and just being tired isn't the same thing. Um, is there a is that like a clinical definition of what burnout is, or is it the same thing as when people are just depressed and they get into depression? Is there a way that we have to distinguish between those things?
There's a clinical diagnosis for depression in the DSM-4. Now, I haven't looked at the DSM.
Right.
I used to look at it fairly regularly. I haven't looked at the DSM-4, and they update it often, so I cannot definitively say that there is a definition in the DSM-4 in terms of a diagnosis for
For burnout.
burnout.
Mhm.
So I don't know if Pastor Hernandez
Yeah,
has seen.
yeah. I mean, depression has it can be diagnosed, right?
Mhm.
There might be some medicine that you can uh, take for it, um, and sometimes it's focused mainly of what's happened in your life. But burnout can be seasonal. It can be caused by external events, not just
Mhm.
stuff that is inside of you and your chemical imbalance in your chemical brain. Of course, they will work together, as cohorts to make your life really bad. If you have burnout and depression together, can lead to suicidal ideation and all kinds of other issues. But it is not the same thing. 100%, it's not the same thing.
Right.
Wow. Listen, we are just out of time. Want to land this plane. We thank you very much for sharing. You gave us a lot of practical and in this last question some spiritual ideas. Um, and so I just want to say thank you. As we end here, what is the what final word would you like to share with those who are listening, whether they are workers, pastors, administrators in the church, or members who sit in the pew? We'll give each of you an opportunity just to give us that last thing that you want them to take away with from this conversation. And we're going to start with Stephanie.
There's two things I will say. Number one, connect with your HR director and try it for pastors. Connect with your HR director. They can give you some good information. And then the last thing, which I always tell our pastors, there's a T-shirt slogan I read one time: "Jesus died for the church, so our pastors don't have to."
Mm. Wow.
Awesome, awesome, excellent. Roger.
Yeah, I will say a couple of things also. Manage your energy, not just your calendar. Do a meeting stacking where you stack a lot of meetings in one day, so you have uh, time for other things that replenish you on other days, and avoid self-diagnosis. I posted that I had a pain right here in the top of my stomach on Facebook. Bad place to post. And I was like, I wonder what it is and what could be a cure for it. And somebody said, my cousin had the same thing, and they died 2 weeks later because they had cancer. And then they put Happy Sabbath after that. Um,
Very, very happy Sabbath.
so don't self-diagnose. Talk to
Mm,
somebody who actually knows. Stop looking at Doctor MD on online, and know exactly what it is that you have. If you feel off, if something feels off, go
Hmm.
talk to somebody. The worst
mhm.
thing is just to keep it in and just I'm just gonna work through it. I'm gonna struggle to it because you burn a lot of bridges on the way. It's not worth to lose the stuff that you're bound to lose if you don't do that.
My Lord, my Lord.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much for our guests that have joined us tonight and following up on this conversation. We had a good conversation last week, had a great conversation tonight. We hope that it has been helpful to somebody tonight. We thank you for those parting resources and counsel that you have both shared with us and with our audience this evening. We hope that it's beneficial in a magnanimous way. We are looking forward to Roger next week. Are we going to give
Yes.
our audience a little sneak peek?
Little tease. I don't know about a sneak peek, but we are going to capitalize on the wave that has hit our country since February 6th with the Super Bowl halftime show.
Oh my.
We're not going to break down the halftime show, but we're going to look at what was done there and see if there are any messages there that can help us in ministry.
For the people that
Speaking
are not like us, or no?
to the
Bad.
people that
Never
are
mind. Sorry. Just-
yeah. We're gonna squabble up. We're gonna get it together and make it happen. But you don't want to miss that discussion next Friday night at 8 o'clock, right here on the Pastors Roundtable. We are looking forward. We have two dynamic guests who understand the culture and who are pastors, and they're going to help us to have that conversation next week. So you want to make sure you're here with us next Friday night as we have that conversation. But tonight, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of Pastors Roundtable, where we strive
Oh,
to.
oh, I'm sorry,
Um,
Raj. Hold on,
oop,
hold on, hold on.
oop.
We got to say hello. I want our audience. Yeah, pump those. Want our audience to let. We haven't done this in a while, but TJ has been in the chat. Everybody, give a shout out to
Yes,
TJ.
yes,
TJ's
Hey,
part of the
yes.
TJ.
team there. And on behalf of Dr. Henry, who's not with us tonight, we just wanted to make sure that you guys give those folk a shout out. So if you would just join us in just saying hi, TJ, or thanks, TJ, being in the chat for us tonight, as well as a shout out to Dr. Henry. Our other team member was one of our guests tonight, Stephanie Scott. Stephanie, always glad to have you in dual roles here at the Pastors Roundtable. Roger Hernandez now is a three-time alum. I think it's three, might be four, here at Pastors Roundtable. I'm sorry, Roger Wade. I just wanted to make sure we didn't get to shout out TJ last week and the week before. Wanted to make sure that we got all the
No
family
problem.
tonight.
And as you were shouting out them, I wanted to shout out Stephanie. There's someone special in the chat tonight. Stephanie's mom is here, Marva Kelly. We just so glad
Mom.
you're here supporting here. Moms, all our moms support us here in the
Hey.
chat. So we appreciate our moms being here for us. Listen, again, thank you for being part of Pastors Roundtable. Please share this. Share this with someone, with your pastor. Maybe your pastor didn't hear it tonight. When you go to church tomorrow, let them know how much you appreciate them and say, hey, I'm going to send you a link for some information to help you. And whatever you can do to help them, you're willing to do. Maybe that will be the thing to start this turnaround in helping pastors not have to deal with burnout. But here at Pastors Roundtable, thank you for joining us. We strive to make ministry relevant,
Resource
Resource and real.
and
On your
real.
mic.
there
Thank
we
you,
go.
everybody.
All right.
Have a good
Good
night.
night, everyone.